What does it mean when a building seems to breathe? When stone begins to move like a tree? When geometry becomes prayer? When color, light, and structure seem to belong not only to architecture but to life itself? More than a century after Antoni Gaudí imagined forms that still feel ahead of our time, a composer asked a new question. What would Gaudí sound like? Welcome to Resonances, where music, health, and identity meet. My name is Patricia Caicedo. Today's episode is very special. We are entering a space where architecture, music, and imagination merge into one experience. This year marks the centennial of the death of Antoni Gaudí, a figure whose work continues to shape not only the skyline of Barcelona, but the way we understand the relationship between nature, spirituality, and artistic creation. And to honor this moment, a new large-scale symphonic choral work will be premiered at the Palau de la Música Catalana, a space that in itself feels like stepping inside a living organism of sound, color, and light. The work is Seven Dreams of Gaudí, composed by the Catalan composer Olivia Pérez Colelmir, who joins me today. This is not just a concert, it is a musical journey through seven visions: nature, the workshop, duality, grief, the uprising, prayer, and the basilica. The piece brings together over 200 musicians, including the Orfeo Català, soprano Núria Rial, and is conducted by Marin Alsop. Olivia, welcome to Resonances.
Hola, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy, and it's a huge honor to be here. Thank you.
So, no, it's an honor to have you here. We are very excited to learn more about you and about the work you just composed. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where did you study music, etc.?
Yeah, I am from Barcelona, and so I studied music in the Conservatorio Superior de Barcelona, Conservatorio Municipal de Música de Barcelona. We call Conservatorio El Bruc, porque está en la calle, is in the Bruc Street with in the Champlas. It's a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous building. So I started there with, and I graduated in the Conservatorio Superior as a classical concerto pianist. And of course, studying, being part of the choir with under the direction of Comalada, and then also studying everything related with harmony, forms, music forms, analyzing all the Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. Yeah, it was really, really a very, very good program, excellent program.
And who was your main teacher during your training
Yes.
years?
Yeah, my main teacher, it was Nuria Boneis, and I love her so much, and I always be thankful to her because everything she made me like I go deeper into the love to the music and remind me how honored we are as an artist and as a musicians, as a pianist, to create this message for the society, for the population, right? So it's kind of our mission, and yes, Nuria Boneis, and then also I was studying under the cátedra of Antoni Bessas. Well,
And in which year you graduated?
I mean, it was a long time ago. I don't even. It was
Time
around the
flies.
2000. Yes, it was around 2000, and then it was the time that the conservatory moved to the new SMUC. But in the prior time to the SMUC, they did a transitional time. It was the San Andreu building, and it was that kind of building transitional. But yeah, I finished in that time before the current building of the SMUC was finished. And then I moved to the US to study at Berklee College of Music. I got a full scholarship and I kept my music path, training as a classical, but also as a jazz pianist.
So that was a turning point because you were training as a classical pianist, but then you moved to the US and you just include you develop your love for jazz and your abilities in this
Yes.
realm.
Yes, actually, it happened as being in Barcelona, right? So when you get to play with so many musicians, and I kind of falls in love with the profile of the musician that was able to improvise on the spot, and it was able to transcribe, not using the score at all, doing the arrangements, and I was mesmerized. And then I said, that language comes from with the jazz, right? So I was asking all those musicians I was playing with. Um, I was honored to play with, and I said, "Where did you get trained? How are you learning to do that?" Because I wanted to be more free and also not to. Of course, I love to play the score as written from the maestros, but being able to create my own music and my compositions and improvise. And always I was saying to my family, remember, why I'm a pianist? Because I'm not a member of orchestra. I was spending 8 hours a day practicing alone. And of course, for a concerto or chamber music, right? Concerto with orchestra or with ensemble, but always it was kind of the solo instrument, right?
I was thinking how the great musicians, the great maestros of the time that we learn now, like Bach or Granados, or they were great improvisers. They were not just, and along the time, in the measure that we canonize those musicians, we lost the ability also within the training of musicians. We are not training them to improvise. So this is a great loss. But the great maestros were great improvisers. I had the opportunity to translate the biography of Enrique Granados. The main biography was written by Dr. Walter Clark in the University of California in English. So in 2016, for his centennial, I translated to the Spanish. And one thing that I learned is that he never played the same thing twice. Even in the same concert that when he played one of his pieces. So in the end, people say, "Maestro, please again play this piece," and he played another completely thing that he made up on the spot.
Yes. I could not be more agree with you. So yes, then I was asking, and they said, well, the place to, to learn from the biggest maestros is to go to Berklee College of Music in Boston. So in order to prepare for my audition, I went to the Conservatorio of Liceu to study the jazz program in Barcelona 5 years to get the audition to get long journey. I came back to college, yeah, for that, and I love it. And then I applied for Berkeley when they were on a tour after my 4 years of. I did 5 years. Yeah, it's kind of a plan that they have in the Conservatorio del Liceo for the jazz.
So how was I'm thinking from the cognitive perspective, learning the technique that is a little bit rigid of the classical musician, and learning many things to acquire the freedom of the jazz musicians using the technique of the classical musician. How was it?
That it was very, very the challenge. You just pointed out the real challenge is that. So it's like because as a classical musician, as a classic pianist, right, you have such a huge discipline, a huge methodology, and you have to be devoting right to the score, what is written, what the original the composer wrote, and there's no freedom, right, or there is no space, of course, to create or improvise. So I remember those sessions when I was practicing those pieces of the maestro. Always I was leaving me space, time, free time to improvise. So when I officially I took the degree as a student of jazz, I think they made me, help me to have those abilities as a classical pianist for the technique, because you can see a big difference. The jazz pianists that they are not coming from a classical tradition. And I know now being at Berkeley and some of my students, so there are things that they struggle, right? Like they have an idea, brilliant idea. They have an
They
idea,
cannot.
they cannot play because they don't have the technique doesn't serve them, right?
So technique at the end also gives you freedom.
Absolutely. So in the moment that you have both the understanding of the language, right, the compositional, the harmonic, the voicings, the chords, and being able to improvise and compose on the spot, and as very important, it's about dialogue, to listen and to interact with the other musicians. So not being a solo, right, a solo pianist, right, this is one of the parts that I was struggling the most. So that the dialogue is the richness, right, and be able to react what, for example, the bass is giving you. That plus the technical of the classic, I think, is the best combination. The sounds that you get from your pianos, there is no. I mean, the technique is always necessary.
Always necessary. And now, oh, that's fascinating. And now, how now being in Boston for how many years?
12 years.
12 years. How is that starts this project of Gaudí? How did this project come into your life? Why Gaudí? How it came out?
Very good question. So it was in the time of the pandemic, and I was reading in a lot of newspaper like, oh, Sagrada Familia maybe is not finishing on time because they shut down. Of course, the tourists there was no tourists, so they were planning originally to finish the Sagrada Familia or the Tower of Jesus that is just happened on the 2026 for the and June 10, right, for the 100 of the passing of the architect. So it was kind of, we were reading with friends, and wow, imagine, said, finally, Sarah Familia is going to finish. And wow, we should do something through tribute to Gaudí. And don't, for me, Gaudí is very special, you know, as a Catalan, but also personally, because my father is an architect. And my father decided to study architecture because of the love that he had for Gaudí's and the modernism, right? So when I was a child, he was taking me to all the La Ruta del Modernismo, no? All the tourism, all the sites of the modernism. And also he was born in front of the Sagrada Familia in one of the buildings.
Oh,
So has been always part of my identity, right? My heritage as a Catalan, but also as an artist, was for my family. So when they said that, I said, "Wow, it would be amazing to do a concert, right?" Starting the idea, but so a couple of friends, they said, "Why you don't do some jazz piece, or chamber like a octet, but jazz related?" And because of course the music that is more popular here is the jazz,
yes.
right? And they
And
were
it's your
in love.
language too.
Yeah, of course. And they were big fans. They would follow me in all my residency, the jazz clubs. They say, "Wow, why you don't do that about Gaudí, right? And you write the music, a piece." And I said, "No, no, no. Gaudí cannot. Gaudí and jazz, they are not aligned."
But they are aligned very much because his freedom, his
Yeah,
mind that didn't have boundaries and crossing, connecting nature with form, with colors, using different, not only merging styles, but materials. So he had that
absolutely.
freedom of the jazz musician, the creativity.
Absolutely. Philosophically, absolutely. So then it's exactly so I thought needs a genius, an artist, the dimension like Gaudí, with those sides like a Sagrada Familia, right? You need to write something majestic, colossal,
Yes.
in dimensions, large, like large scale, huge scale. So then is when I came with the idea, okay, I'm going to write for double choir to honor also the human voice, because Gaudí always said that the human voice is the creature of God, right? And is the instrument that allows us to connect with the divinity.
And we also have in Catalonia a very big choral tradition through centuries.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, Gaudí was attending on Sundays to San Felipe Neri, and it was the beginning of the Orfeo Català. They were singing there, and he was fascinated by the music of Palestrina and all the music a cappella. There are some chords like that feel like the choir music and the cappella music.
Also, the connection between that period of a cappella music, when you mentioned Palestrina, and architecture, because
Yes.
the music can be translated to architectural forms, the structure, the mathematical structures of music.
Absolutely. So exactly. So he was loving, and then the moment that I started writing, or the beginning, right, when you visualize the idea, the concept, I said the choir needs to be the instrument, or the human voice needs to be the instrument to elevate, to represent that spirituality and symbolism of Gaudí. Double choir, I'm going to write for the Orfeo Català, and then for a symphonic orchestra, right, a large one that supports all.
So
And of
you
course,
were start dreaming with writing for the Orfeo Català because at that moment you didn't have an agreement
no,
with the Orfeo Català.
no, exactly. So I was writing without knowing which orchestra, or it will be a large scale orchestra, and which choir, and it will be the dream choir. That yes, at that moment I
So the name is very good because it's Seven Dreams of Gaudí, but it starts with the dream of Olivia.
yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
because it was your dream, your idea, but you didn't have a confirmation of any of those. You were not sure this will happen.
I don't know even. I mean, it was a right when you create a project. You don't know if it's going to be represented, and it's going to be you dream of, right? And where, and if it's going to be in a small church, in a small theater here in a small town. So of course you dream big, and it's one of the things that I learned when I moved to Boston and to Berkeley, right? Dream big and work for that, right? And I started writing with that vision very clear, at least in my soul, right? What it will be that path. But yeah, so I describe it. I said I'm going to write a symphonic chorus
So
symphonic.
now that we have the dream of Olivia, now you use the idea of dreams, you structure the work as seven dreams. So what does dreaming mean in this context? And are these Gaudi dreams, or are the dreamings, or are we dreaming him through the music, or how is that?
Yes. So when I started the research, right, I started of course reading all the reference books, and also we were collaborating. I was collaborating with the University Politécnica de Catalunya
Uh-huh.
under the direction of Caldric Santana, is the chair of Gaudí. And then so the reference books, and then even I had access to drafts that they are not published, so some drafts, and also visiting fields or sites that they are not open to the public. So that opened your mind as a creator, right? It's like a, oh wow. And then those scenes, those moments of his life, those feelings behind, those emotions, those landscapes were starting touching your soul as a creator, and they say, okay, I want to be sure that I want to make one moment that is tribute to the nature, right, for the reference. And then I started, okay, I want to be sure that I want to do a tribute to that taller, that workshop of the father, right, that he was a calderero.
Mm-hmm.
So and then I starting kind of, for sure, I want to be sure that I reflect or write about his duality. What represents to be so ahead of your time that you are forever.
An outsider in your own time.
Exactly, a torment. The torment that generates to try to be understood, but be
Yes.
ahead and may not be. So that man is the moment of the duality. The man is versus genius, right? And be under the form or the aesthetic form of your time, but not believing that that is the concept of the beauty. You have your own
Yes.
concept, right? And the second moment, especially that taller, when I said, was to get into his vision, his capacity to foresee the volume of the space. He said it's so important. The most important as an architect is to see the space, not the volume. And he had that ability in a time that there was not softwares for that, right? So that way, I was narrating or picturing the moments of his life, emotionally, spiritually, of course, his relation with God.
Yeah, that was foundational for him because he did everything through God.
Exactly. And that it was starting with the movement. That this is why the movement 6 is called the prayer, right? and that intimate connection that he had in his praying to God. And then and then at the end ended up, of course, I wanted to finish with the seventh moment, La Basilica, the ecstasy that represents when you are inside, and his vision of to elevate the human beings, the human souls to the no, to the divinity.
But it's kind of the materialization, the embodiment of his own spirituality. So I see how beautiful you connected this prayer moment with the basilica, because the prayer moment that is very intimate externalizes or embodies or materializes in the stone of the basilica and all his
Absolutely.
buildings.
And actually, the last theme, there is an area in the sixth moment in the prayer that is the leitmotif is going to take us to the seven. And in the seventh moment in the basilica, that theme appears again. And it's the circle of the nature, right? The materia becomes spirituality, right?
Yes.
And then that form takes all the evolution on the seven. So, and then why seven? Because at the end of the day, all the moments I wanted, all the emotions and big moments of his life that I consider interesting from my perspective as a composer, they ended up being seven. And it was perfect because it's the seven, the number seven, what represents la creación. So it just was perfectly. It's not like I was trying to force to create seven. It just
It came to be like that. And also when I'm reading the names of these dreams, that they seem different, they are at the end all connected and are the same, because nature is also an expression of the greatness of the God. And
absolutely. Connecting, I wanted to do like a, of course, like a, it's not, doesn't pretend or doesn't intend to be biological at all. It's more represent the values of the love, the grief, the the lost, right?
see,
When he mentioned, very important, when he mentioned there is no beauty without loss
lost.
or grief. And exactly. So that is the moment of the grief, right? The moment for, and so all these moments are transitional for those emotions. And
And that we all experiment like a cyclical thing in our lifetime.
exactly. As a circle of the nature, everything is born, develops, and die. But die, the materia, right? La materia, but becomes spirituality, right? And then gets born again. So this is I wanted to be sure that every movement is connected perfectly with the other and narrates a circle instead of horizontal line.
Oh, so beautiful. I'm looking forward to being there and listening to this beautiful piece.
Thank you so much.
So it's good because now we understood how you structure the moments and how you got into the soul of Gaudí to reflect it in your music.
And I want it to be for, of course, chronologic order. This is why I start with the Gaudí child, kid, and the moment, the first moment, and his relation with the nature, right? And how that inspired so much to develop what it was his philosophy and his, his architectural philosophy behind his masterpieces, right? So that for sure is how the geometry, and this is why it is a counterpoint, start with a canon after the a cappella movement that comes from the space. So it's opening with the Gaudí kit off stage, because I wanted to make a reference. Gaudí was saying always, for example, the El Palau Way, the way
Mm-hmm.
that he developed the organ on the top. He did it on las salas, the spaces around, the patio central. It was for him, his philosophy behind it was, I want to represent an instrument or the sound that we don't recognize where it's coming from. So it comes from the space, comes from the
Like surrounding us.
around it, but you cannot locate the exactly point. of the origin of the source of the sound. So I wanted to start that way. So I started with Gaudí Kit, treble voices, right? Off stage, one in one space of the Palau de la Música, behind the organ. So we cannot recognize where that comes. It comes like angelical or from the space or from the nature. And then antiphonal, another Gaudí 2 antiphonal answering in another space off stage.
That's so beautiful because also you say you start with Gaudí Kid, but you also start with nature and Gaudí Kid, I mean, being a child. What is for us being a child? Is being connected with everything and being observing, playing with nature. That was one of the greatest characteristics or virtues that Gaudí had, the ability to observe nature and translate those observations into his architecture. His buildings are like living creatures.
Absolutely.
So he was an artist, a spiritual person, but he worked like a scientist, experimenting with form, with gravity. So did you find parallels between his architectural thinking and your work developing your compositional language in this piece?
Yes, I love your question. Absolutely. Actually, I think that the composer, we are scientists. Absolutely. And even more when it's a large scale. I wrote for 200 instruments.
Imagine.
Yes. So they are going to be, yeah, 200 pieces right on the stage. And for making that happen from the microcosmos to the macrocosmos, right? From the little detail of two lines and to build that architecture on vertical and on horizontal, how every layer of music relates to each other in vertical way. It's the same that I was seeing
The building, like,
the building, the different floors, how they connect each others, and then also horizontally, right? One space next to the other, and that is the form and the structure. So vertically for me is the orchestration, how many dance, right? The density that we are creating, the thickness, the colors, the tones. That are the instruments, right? That represent those, and horizontal is the structure and the form, and then it perfectly, like a physically, mathematically connected. Because if the building, right, music building and physical building is too dense or too thick, it was la masa,
see,
vertically, but it's not proportionally equal on the horizontal, that building is going.
it would fail. Yes. Yeah.
So I also imagine the physics. So always I was saying, I'm seeing myself in that process, like as an architect, I was saying this is the challenge, like a building a great un rascacielos, no?
Un rascacielos.
Created, yes, because it's the physics are behind how you connect 200 layers of vertically, between them, transparent enough, but not overlapping. The colors that make shine each other, the connection between
And also the light. You are saying the colors. When I think in Gaudí, I think in the light. His stained
absolutely.
glasses, how he connected light.
Yes,
So
yeah, the lights, the transparency, and how that shine the lights. And this is all exactly is la materia, the physics, right, of the architect is the tone, the instruments, the color, and the orchestration, right? So those elements, I always say, yeah, the technology behind the physical and the material of the building is what we have to do, we had to do for writing a symphony that with that large scale, right? And in terms of the form and structure as well, you don't want to be too busy all the time. You want to be
too heavy.
balanced, too heavy. You want to cap the tension when it's important, but also being completely naked, right? Transparency of the monodia or tutis, then the transition through monodic passages and more transparent, and others that thick or very contrapuntistic, or some other that are very choral oriented, very tutti, no? It's just fascinating. It's part of the building. So every movement has been developed thinking exactly about that.
So you are an architect of sound.
I love that. I will take it. Well, when I built the seven movements, yes, like okay, you huge, you have a huge. I had a huge plano, like a sketch, like the size of the whiteboard, occupying the whole wall, and then you start picturing what is the tutti moment, what's the more, the tutti and apotheosic moment. What are the most transparent, more intimate? And then that comes with ensemble size and the writing. And each one takes you to the other and the perfect balance. So yes, there is a science, absolutely. I I believe in the inspiration. The inspiration comes with the melody, the harmony, the rhythm comes already describing, singing inside of you. But in terms of building that architecture, there is a science, a scientifics behind. And the task of us, the amount of hours is the same task that you face.
Yes. When I arrived in Barcelona, you know that, like you, I have moved. The family that welcomed me was the family of Jordi Bonet, the architect who directed the works of the Sagrada Familia for many years. And my dad, like yours, is also an architect.
Wow.
So I had the privilege of visiting the basilica with Jordi himself, listening to him explaining the building from the inside, not only as a monument, but as a living architectural organism. One of the things that stayed with me was his explanation of the columns, the big columns of the basilica. So, Gaudí did not design them simply as vertical supports. He imagined them as trees, and we can see that nowadays. We see big trees as trunks that rise, branch out, and distribute weight naturally, almost as if the building were a forest made of stone. But what was extraordinary was the mathematical solution he found. The columns of the Sagrada Familia are based on what he called a double twist form, two helicoidal movements turning in opposite direction. So, as the column rises, its geometry changes. It begins with a polygonal or star-shaped base and gradually transforms into a circle. And this movement gives the column a strength, elegance, and a sense of organic growth. But what fascinates me when you're displaying this is because I immediately thought of the double helix of DNA. Of course, Gaudí was not thinking about DNA at the time because he died in 1926, and the structure of DNA was described by Watson and Crick in 1953, many years later. But the visual and conceptual connection is very powerful. Two intertwined movements, a spiral logic, a structure that is both beautiful and efficient. So, DNA is one of the fundamental structures of life. The helix appears again and again in nature, in plants, in shells, in storms, in galaxies. The way things grow, twist, rise, and organize themselves. So, what is marvelous, astonishing, is how Gaudi arrived at this not through computers or the tools we have today, but through observation, intuition, geometry, and the understanding and connection he had with nature. This is what I find him so moving. He was not copying nature superficially. He understood that nature has a logic, that beauty and structure are not separated, and that forms of life can teach architecture how to stand, how to breathe, how to grow. So, from that time on, when I look at the columns in the Sagrada Familia, I don't see only stone, I see trees, mathematics, movements, and something that feels almost biological. So, for me, Gaudí created an architecture that seems to belong to the same language as nature and science itself. I mean, nature is science, science is nature.
He was so ahead of his time.
So ahead of his time. But see, I love Gaudí. And you, of course, and I will be in love with your architectural piece too, Olivia. So, but you had a libretto also. There is a libretto by Anna Weil. How did this collaboration shape the piece, or how the text influenced it? The text came first, and you put the music, or the music first. How was it?
Yes. So so after this process, right, to capturing the different moments and the storytellings, I wanted in every moment the symbolism or the emotion behind. Um, I started like researching who will be the ideal poet, right? I was very clear with to myself, like the concept I wanted narrated through the poem, through a Catalan poem, right? New writing for the occasion, um, and then kind of capturing the emotion, not with the intention to narrate scenes and explaining biographic moments, no, but capturing the emotion and the tension, right? The soul. So and then I got to meet a lot of poets, Catalan poets, incredible. And then when I met Anna, and I started kind of, okay, can we do? Mira, this is what I have already. I had already the music of 3 or 4 movements, at least the themes, right? The themes, the little seeds, right, before it becomes the whole orchestration. And then let's go to see how it works. And then, of course, he's in Barcelona, and I am here, so we were doing those meetings Zoom. Like we were so good together with Zoom, and then I was singing. When I write, of course. When the human voice, I write with lyrics. I put my own lyrics and express the text that comes naturally, because I don't think they can be separate. So comes already with vowels and the consonants, the stress, the intonation. So that it was delivered to Anna, right? Okay, and then she is such an incredible writer that made a new text with the same
Oh, so when you did
voice.
it with your own test first.
Depending of the moment, but yeah, over so the first moments, it started with the prayer, right? The prayer, for example, and the theme of the nature, and the theme of the grief. So those 3 moments they were coming already with my own text, right, or with sounds, vowels, consonants. So you hear, because I mean, when you write for human voice, right, that needs to be completely aligned with sound. So comes already
Also
the melody.
vocally with the technique, so
Exactly,
don't put an E when you are on a high note, or
exactly. The intonation, exactly. When is the highest frequency? What is the consonant, the sounds in that regard, right? Or is a 2 syllables word, now it's a 3 syllables word, and there is a dot. So you already write with that. So I had
the
my
breathing, the spaces for breathing, etc.
exactly. So, for example, in the case of the pregaria and the prayer, I started with a prayer, with a pray that my grandparents they show me, right? So my grandparents were from Olot, um, and so they at night they were praying with me and showing me a Catalan prayer that is, Bon Jesuset amorós, fes-me l'ànima ben pura, del meu cor una clausura, que no hi entri sinó Dios. So
Ay,
I
qué
started with,
bonito.
and that way, so every night we were doing the praying to the Jesus, the baby Jesus that day. So with had no music, right? So when I started the moment of the praying, and I had that intimate moment to relate, right, or to narrate about how Gaudi felt in those intimate moments of spirituality with God. I start singing that piece and came with a melody.
Claro.
Came already with a melody. So the melody cannot be separated
It's
with that.
separated, yes.
So that then Anna, of course, took that as a seed, incredible, and then starting. She's so good at starting matching and start at the beginning with Bonja, Susette, Amoros, and then she started developing everything. So it was the collaborative process.
Because that was very, very hard for her, because I mean, to break this marriage between text and music, and put another thing that
It wasn't
was
breaking. It was just perfect. It was like something in my own words. No, for example, this prayer we kept, right, or we kept as much, But then how that evolved, it was the collaborative process. Okay, I hear that, and then it was more, of course, my poetry skills are not. She was using her art form incredible, like okay, when you hear two syllables with a here and the other, she was putting the perfect with the meaning and with the melody. Those some moments they were like that, so completely at the same time collaborating, me singing and playing, and then she created on that. And a few moments it was more like a generic kind of what, for example, la revolución, no, the uh, like it's based on the la semana trágica, la semana
The
trágica.
uprising.
Exactly, uprising that they translated, yeah, la revolta in the
Yeah.
original name. So is the 19 based on the 1909, right? So that, for example, yes, how we the like we were talking, I was
Yes,
explaining.
how to express this anger.
The basis of the section of the basis of the choir are represented the revolutionaries, and this has this boom boom that right. So I sing with onomatopeyas or with accents, and then this vowel, this that. So we do at the same time.
It's interesting because what you are describing, for me, probably because I'm seeing from the lenses of a classical singer, sounds like a lot like creating an opera. Did you think in putting different characters, or have you thought in creating developing this in the future into an opera?
Well, let's go to join now then. Let's get to see what.
but
but
but I see it
never
now.
think
I can.
yeah. Well, in this moment, absolutely, yeah, because in the yeah, at the uplift uprising, right? They call
See.
in the translation. So yes, the revolutionaries are the tenor, the low frequency of the choir, and then the bass, and the tenors is the voice of Gaudí. So Gaudí is not a solist, is a whole tenor section, and is la voz, the voice of the humanity, la voz de la humanidad.
That is beautiful. That is not an individual, but it's a group. It's humanity. That's beautiful. That I think Gaudi would love that. If he would be living, he would love that. And how would you maintain a sense of intimacy, for example, in these moments, inside something of this scale? How to find this balance?
When I am writing,
When for the final product, because it has a very intimate moments, but you are doing
yes,
it in a big scale. It's like a big basilica of sound,
yeah,
but showing very little details also.
yes,
And
the attention, every detail matters, and I mean they are emotions. So the human, no, the emotion, the soul, the human soul, and the spirituality has a component of the introversion, right? The intimacy. But if you think about how powerful, how immense, so it was focusing in the immensity, right? So, and that immensity can be narrated with all the nuances in orchestra, right? So, this large scale doesn't mean there needs to be busy and thick. It's about how many details and nuances can be featured in every measure, right? So every single color of the instruments, the choosing of the orchestration, the doubling with the melody, harmony, and rhythm, they are exactly there for that reason.
wow.
So immensity inside of the intimacy, or vice versa. And they are, for example, the requiem, the loss, the grief, el dol, in Català, of course, the original. Uh, it's a requiem, and it's the singing of the mother from the
Seeing Jesus.
the mother nature, that is the Nuria Real, the soprano featured by Nuria Real, singing to Gaudí, and she is already deaf, but she's talking to Gaudí and giving her the hope and support, and saying, I am here always, not in a material way, but spiritually, I'm
Spirit.
always. And then I wrote that moment in a very intimate way. So it's a chamber orchestra. So that is a chamber strings with aria, with a soprano soloist.
So you are telling me that the requiem is Mother Nature reconforting.
It's the mother of nature, see, the mother of Gaudí that can be seen as well as a mother nature, but represents the mother of Gaudí with the voice of the soprano featured by Nuria Real. That voice talks to Gaudí from the far away, from the other,
Beyond.
yeah, beyond, from heaven, and talks
Wow.
to Gaudí. And that is completely transparent chamber orchestra, minimal, the, you know,
This is beautiful what you are saying to me, because usually when we sing requiems,
I know.
the requiem is singing the loss and the sadness of the loss of the person. So we are asking God, but we are deep in sadness. But you are saying that this requiem gives a completely different perspective, because it's the voice of mother from the beyond, giving hope for the future.
Yeah,
Is
says I
hope.
am exactly. I am always that intimacy, what we talked about before, right? Like there is no beauty or no art without lost, right? That grief, how that grief, the figure, the mother figure for Gaudí developed his vision spiritually, emotionally, and at the end in the architecture. So, and how that voice that he was listening from his mom, so was accompanying, right, in that kind of moment of sorrow, the grief, but hope at the end.
Hope.
She's holding him. So that intimacy is the way that they wrote. And there is the choir at the end. It's all an aria, right, with a very thin orchestra support chamber. And then at the end, the choir adds with humming, no lyrics, and then elevating that spiritual, right?
Oh, that's so beautiful.
It's
And you know
inspiration.
that I'm thinking that because I'm interested in this subject of grief and the relationship with grief and music, how we use music as a tool to overcome grief. This I when listening to you, I'm also understanding this voice of the mother and mother nature is also the power of music to elevate us and to help us overcome grief from all the losses we have in life. Not
Absolutely.
only when somebody dies, when we get old, when we lost things, when we change, have discontinuity in life. And music is always there to accompany us, to uplift us, to be with us.
And I hope
That's
that all of you, know, the audience, feel, the same way, or feel connected, and their soul, right, moves into that way, or into their own life, right? Each person is different, but yeah, when I wrote and decided that the grief movement, it will be that intimacy is what I felt, and it was my, it's at the end of the day, it's your choice as a composer, but it's what I wasn't that with Gaudí to know exactly, right? But it's like, what do you think that Gaudí was feeling, and how I can narrate in from the from my truth, from my honest truth, and it's what I believe.
it's so beautiful. Oh, I want to listen to. But this project, as I was learning about it, goes beyond music. It brings into sound something Gaudí imagined but never heard. One of the most fascinating elements is the reconstruction of Gaudí's hyperboloid bells. So tell me about it. How is this sound and what it represents? And the story of these bells.
Yes. So the Gaudí was like designed the Sagrada Familia, right, with the 84 bells on the to create kind of a huge carillon, a huge instrument on those bells, right? So and then the prototypes, they were lost during the Spanish Civil War, right? So Galdric Santana, the Gaudí's chair in the University Polytechnica of Catalunya, has been researching, I don't know, I think for 10, 15 years, um, to trying to reconstruct the
Ah,
prototypes lost during the Civil War. And he made it. So he came with the prototype. And when I was writing, right, at the same time, of course, from the beginning, I said, I'm going to leave the 7 moment at the end. Hopefully, we have the bell.
Hoping for the best.
Yes, we have, and we didn't know how many we could build, right? So it's like, okay, 2, 1, on a scale at the beginning, like a 7.
And how big and how will it sound also?
Yeah, exactly. And then overtone. So okay, I will need to write that moment, knowing that it will be the Basilica, no, tribute to the Sagrada Familia, of course, as a culmination of his his life and his spiritual endeavor, right? But so it was fascinating. So I started the last one, and at that time, Galdric Santana said, "Olivia, I got the prototypes. I am building, casting."
Yeah.
When they built that, when the machine to make those happen, and then so I was able to hear those overtone. So I can choose, and I said, okay, I need a C bell. I got like,
What a what a luxury.
can we do first a C and then a E flat? Okay, so and then he built a B flat first. Then no, that didn't work as well because create well, so always there is a frame to get a bit out of tune, right? The bell, so they, I mean, he mastered and then incredible. So I was able to feature the C bell and the E flat bell, and they were the first one.
Mate.
And then so I wrote over those, having that presently. So the 7 moments start with tubular bells and the Gaudí bell. And actually, I wrote in the score, when the piece goes in tour, we are not going to have the Gaudí bells. So I said, well, Gaudí bells only for the premiere, because we have the Gaudí bells before they come. They are going to go to the tower of Sagrada Familia after.
Wow, that's so
They will be on the stage, yeah, and they will sound for the first time. So yes, they are the first Gaudí bells casted are going to be sounding in the piece.
so it adds an innovation component
Yeah.
to this. I mean research, because it is a result of the research of this architect that you mentioned.
Yes, that absolutely. And then the overtones, and then the orchestration, and the key, right? The tonality and the keys. The I choose was to serve the best, the most brilliant resonance for those bells and all the whole orchestration in general. Yeah.
So interesting. So here in Barcelona, Gaudí is not a distant historical figure. He's part of daily life because we are surrounded by his work, his forms, his colors, his way of understanding beauty. And in many ways, Gaudí shapes the identity of the city. He is deeply Catalan, but at the same time, his work speaks to the world. So, how you being a Catalan person, living in Boston, teaching in Berkeley, how do you experience this balance between something deeply rooted in our place, creating something that is very Catalan, but at the same something that speaks to the world, to resonates globally? How is this balance in your work? How have you reflect about it?
But it's more in terms of my personality or in terms
Of the piece.
of the piece. So I think that, I mean, I didn't. I feel that Gaudí is a universal genius, belongs to the humanity.
Yes, that's true.
So I don't believe in borders when it takes to create or to honor a genius of the history, right? So that's been said. So Gaudí had, of course, the profound heritage and an identity with the Catalan values, right? But as a genius, as an architect,
He's from the humanity.
exactly, he was bringing this into the humanity with the global vision, right? The globality in terms of his time, right? Universal, but also in terms of the history time. So in that regard, I didn't see. I think that those values of a genius, of a creator like him, belongs to humanity.
To humanity.
They are common in all the places of the world, right? Because it's what makes the genius genius.
That's beautiful because it also makes us reflect. Sometimes here in Catalonia, we are so self-centered, looking our neighbor, looking inside and not looking at the world. So this is a way to show that yes, we are who we are because we keep our traditions, etc. But we are connected in a global scale. We cannot be isolated from it. And Gaudí is a perfect example of it. And
Absolutely. And we have to honor to give to the opportunity, of course, if this piece helps or any of the all the activities that are around it to the Gaudí year, right, helps to bring awareness and knowledge about who was Gaudí internationally, right, and the magnitude. Because it's true that in United States, at least in Boston, right, for example, or in the East Coast, the principal academia centers of huge like academic and artistic educations, they don't know that much Gaudi. And that's the reality. They do know very well Dali, they do know very well Picasso, but Gaudi doesn't have international, the same, hasn't arrived to that level of recognition internationally or awareness. Or not.
probably is because, I mean, if you compare it with the painters arrive to many more people because of the circulation of their work in museums, etc. The problem is thinking in Gaudí only as an architect. He was an architect, but he was many more other things. He worked with iron, he worked with wood, he worked with design. He was a great designer. He was many things, and we have not seen or project him in his all aspects.
Absolutely. There's so much to be known and discover in this area of the world about Gaudí, but also, for example, now in that regard, the people recognize La Sagrada Familia. So you show them a picture or you say, and they recognize
Nice.
people, with, in the educational world, right, or artistic world, but they don't connect necessarily who was the.
Who was.
And
And
that,
finally, I would love to talk to you forever, but I thinking that if Gaudí would hear this work, The Seven Dreams of Gaudí, today, what do you think he would recognize? Or how would...
wow, I hope, I mean, Galdric Santana, when I finish, right, and he's the eminence, the person to talk about how probably, how Gaudi, as an architect, would feel. Galdric said, "Oh my God, it's really the vision that Gaudi had. You represented. I don't. I think that Gaudi will be very proud." Is what Galdric Santana said. He will be tremendously proud, and you represented his vision is to be featuring his bells as a part of the completely work of art in its totality, right? Um, and the way that you capture the emotions and his values. I mean, that's the only thing I can say because I don't know. I hope that he will love it, but I need to think or to say what Gaudi will say. But I can say what Galdric Santana said.
And what do you expect people, audience, the audience to live with when they listen to your amazing piece?
Well, to my friends and family and followers that I know personally, right? I said to them, be sure that you bring napkin because it's very emotional. You might cry and you want to cry. Um, let just your soul be touched by the music, impact, and connect with that pathos into into your own moment. And I hope that the people get really emotional and can also to hear in music what the spirituality, the philosophy, and the values of Gaudí, but also represents the human condition, right? The values that we want to feature that as a humanity, who we are is
The
there.
aspiration that we have,
Yeah, the
to
spiritual,
the transcendence.
the transcendent, the ecstasy to that transcendent, the nature force and the spirituality force or God, whatever you want to call,
That's beautiful because it's not just confined to the Christianity, the Christian tradition. Gaudí transcends that. It could be of any religion because it's the spirituality, it's the how you capture it in nature, in what runs you.
Absolutely. And then the spirituality exactly is universal. And then also the beauty and how the beauty and loss can be connected. And then the ecstasy. So I really hope that they get into that space and the music has that capacity or that print to them and the audience and they live moved by it and thinking that it might be possible humanity where the hope and the peace is. Because at the end of the day, it's a peace as well, right? That feature or wants to talk deeply about where, why we are here, where we're coming from, and what's our future as a human being, right? And do we want to leave a better world to our, descendants? So it's about also about hope and the moment that I narrate about the war and what you said, the voice of the hope and the new humanity, they are eternal questions that happen in the time of Gaudi, but they are happening right now.
Not right now. And now, what I was thinking that you are an architect of sound. So when creating this, you have been reproducing how this uh, way of doing as architect. So I was thinking that I don't know if you know that when the Duomo de Firenze, Santa Maria di Fiore, was about to be presented for the first time, they commissioned, it was 1436 or so, they commissioned a composer to write a piece, but having in mind all the mathematical uh, how can you say that in English? All the see the mathematical measures, everything translated that into music. So in this
Coding, la codificación de coding.
so he composed Guillaume Dufay composed a motete, un motete that was just composed following all the mathematical measures structures of the of the basilica of the time of the cúpula del Duomo.
Sí.
So he did the same in 1436, and you are doing this now in 21st century with a much more complex building with a team of women mainly, no? With the exception of the architect, the poet is a woman. The conductor will be a woman also.
Marian Alsop, of course, yeah.
Who is this? Tell me something about the conductor.
The conductor. And how do you about the how did she connected with the project or in general about her
Yes, something. Why is she the best to be conducting this piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It's the same, coming back to what we said at the beginning, right? That I started writing without knowing, right? It will be performed where and by who. So, through a manager that I had at that time, and we got to meet her, right? And we said, okay, we have this project, and we want to talk to her. So she made us time, and so I started talking about the project. And then still it was a music, it was the idea, the vision, and then she was checking other music, of course, that they wrote, but with other projects. And she was so generous. Always I thought, I mean, the people are leading artists. When I say leading, the leads artists of
Sí.
every century, or every generation or every century, it's because of that. Their generosity is like she is probably one of the busiest people in the world, and she made that time after her concert in Philadelphia Orchestra. It was incredible. So she invited me to go, me and my friends, and then we went there, and then I explained the vision and said, okay, I feel like you have, Olivia, exactly what you need. It's very clear what I'm seeing that you are doing is great. Let me hear. So basically, I started writing okay, as an audition. So I started with a 6 movement, the prayer, and when I delivered to her, she said, Olivia, this is fantastic. I'm completely doing this.
Oh,
And
that's
then
so nice.
and then imagine I had to write 6 other movements.
Oh.
It's like, okay, no
What
pressure.
a pressure.
And then I said, oh my God, opportunity like this in life, how many times, right? And then I said, maestro, which orchestra would you think that it will be the perfect suit for? And then she was the one recommended and calling Philharmonia of London, asking to premiere the piece. So at that point, it's just surreal, the wildest of the dreams, right? And then my responsibility was to enclosure myself and to write and to research, investigate, study as much. And I wrote the other 6 moments. And that's the story. So the story behind Marin Alsop, she's the first woman in the history. She is the pupil of Leonard Bernstein.
Wow.
So she was. So there is a very beautiful movie. I will encourage to all of you, if you can. It's called The Conductor. It's a documentary. The documentary, and they are different in the. I saw the different other movies called The Conductor, but you will relate this because you see her face on the poster, and it was premiered and also awarded in the Festival of Tribeca.
Oh, okay, New
5 years
York.
ago. The conductor, yes. So it narrates incredible. So narrates her story, being the first woman leading everything. So she got rejected as a woman. The women they were not supposed to be conductors. They could not access to the studies. So she got rejected to Juilliard every year during 3 times, 4 times as a conductor to do the master, and she was a violinist. And then she decided to train herself. So uh, these kind of miracle things, and people that really entrepreneurs, they believe in her, of course, in her
Yes.
talent. They put orchestra together and she started training, is what the movie, also the documentary, talks about. So she trained herself as a conductor until a point that she presented herself to Tanglewood in the famous Berkshire
Yes.
Festival
Yeah.
here in close to Boston, and she presented herself in front of Leonard Bernstein. And so Leonard Bernstein fell completely in love with her talent and took her as a
Pupil.
pupil. Yeah. So, and there's a famous phrases that say, I don't recognize or I distinguish between genre. I recognize your talent. So when I hear the eyes, I don't care if it's a woman or man conductor, of course. So it was the first time. After that, she opened, Marin also opened the path for the
Too many women.
months the following, and actually she's the lead of one of the main academic structure of the conductors training program in the US and international, and fellowship and scholarship. And she's the first woman to conduct in the Vienna for Vienna Orchestra and to conduct of major 5 orchestras.
So we will have a super conductor also. Olivia, you cannot imagine how happy I am when I listen to your story of how you made this dream, this idea come to reality. You put it down to earth, you materialize it, to see how much work you have put into this, how much love also, and how much talent, because it's your entire life of training since you were a child in Barcelona until now. So putting together all that and receiving the help of other talented people. So I'm so happy that you made this dream a reality, and I'm so proud of being here talking to you and excited about the coming premiere. Super emocionada, excited, happy. So
oh my God, thank you. You melt my heart. Thank you. I really appreciate your words.
de verdad lo digo, I admire you very much, and I'm very happy for you, and the world should be grateful because we have artists who pursue dreams, who look into higher, more elevated things. So, like you. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much to you. for this. It has been really a pleasure to be able to share my story with you, and has been really fascinating.
And I hope many people come. So Seven Dreams of Gaudí will premiere on June 10th at the Palau de la Música Catalana. So if you are in Barcelona, you can miss this event. Tickets are already available on the Palau's website. And this will be, as you all know by now, a very rare moment and to experience something we will remember forever. And this podcast is possible thanks to the support of the Barcelona Festival of Song, a summer program dedicated to the study of the history and interpretation of Latin American and Iberian art song in Spanish, Catalan, and Portuguese for classical singers, pianists, and musicologists. The festival returns in a few weeks in July, so you can learn more at barcelonafestivalofsong.com. This episode is also supported by Mundo Arts, the premier publisher of Latin American and Iberian art song and vocal music, and by the Center for Iberian and Latin American Music at the University of California, Riverside. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and please follow Olivia in all her social networks. What is your Instagram, Olivia?
It's my name, Olivia Perez Coimir, yes.
And you are also in Spotify, your music, your CDs, or your...
Yeah, my album, my album premiere, it was 2 years ago. My first album was a leader, like a lead pianist, jazz, right? So, published.
So I hope everybody will go to listen to Olivia. Muchas gracias. Thank you for listening to Resonances. Until next time, listen deeply.